All right, so we want to get started on time because we have a lot to share with you today. So I'm just going to jump right in. As we're getting started, obviously we're testing out the chat. We will definitely be monitoring the chat today as we go. We'll also be doing some polls as well as opening up your mics to have a little bit of an interactive conversation as we go. So let's get started. Welcome. This is our third organizational adulting webinar in the series and the last. We are Explain. We're a design consultancy. That means
Holly, I'm sorry to interrupt you. The chat window still overlaying the presentation.
Oh, I think you have to move yours, hon.
Oh, I probably do. So if that's happening to any of you, then you can move it yourself.
Okay. All right. So we're a design consultancy, and a lot of people ask us what that means. That just means the work we do, it sits really at the intersection of design, culture change, as well as strategy and strategy activation. We've been doing this for a long time, but I hate to say how many years. So let's skip right into, I'm Holly Noto. I am the Director of Consulting at Explain. And joining me today is Ben Carmel. Ben is an instructional designer and our culture advisor here at Explain. You can follow along today on Twitter with #orgadulting, or you can also participate in the polls here. Our goals today are really to give everyone a revised understanding of workplace communication, and from our point of view, why we think it's so vital to business success. We also want to share some mindsets and behaviors for effective workplace communication, and we want to give you some things that you can start doing today to build your self-awareness and communications muscles. So really quickly, for those of you who haven't joined us on our past organizational adulting webinars, we thought we'd just share a little bit about what adulting is. Organizational adulting simply is this. It's great behavior at work. We think of it as not culture, but really what makes culture work. It's our behaviors. It's the things that make us highly productive, collaborative, interactive, and co-creative. Are the behaviors that we have that help us be innovative, adaptive, and creative at work. It's the behaviors that are driven by purpose, that are driven to engage and be engaging, and behaviors that help us connect and create community around us. So when we first started this process of thinking about our vision of organizational adulting, great workplace behaviors, we didn't want to go it alone. So we reached out to our major community, our past clients, and maybe even some potential clients and said, if this is our vision for organizational adulting, what's stopping you now? What are the big barriers to doing this, to these behaviors being sort of the foundation of your workplace culture? And in that polling process and the interviews that we did, we found that you told us that divisive behaviors were the #1 barrier to great behavior at work. #2 was apathy and resistance. We covered those in webinar #1 and #2. And today, we're actually going to take those next 5, those sort of feelings of vague and not very transparent communication, or feeling like people are bullying and power struggling, the feelings of disempowerment, avoidance, or even disrespect. And we're rolling them all into this particular webinar. And our rationale for this is that those things really can all be remedied with what we call great communication. But to understand that it's not so simple as just communication, we have to actually change our definition of great communication. So if you think about it, vagueness, feelings of disrespect, or feelings of triangulation, or feelings, let me go back, of just feeling like avoidance and disempowerment, it's not about, writing a better email. It's not about having a great presentation, an informative newsletter, or even announcements. What we're really saying is that great communication in the workplace is a bit of the Rosetta Stone. It's this thing that if we can get it right, we can really unlock a great workplace culture. So we have to change our definition of communication to do that. Our definition of communication, this sort of Rosetta Stone, this thing that unlocks great behavior, is something more in person. It's interactive, it's interpersonal. And it's the connective tissue, or a conduit, between all of us as nodes in our workplace network. And it helps us modernize our network behavior as well. We're talking about communication that is dynamic. It is interactive. It's driven by purpose. It's driven by meaning and creates meaning. It's very human. It allows us to really treat each other like human beings and recognize that we have emotions and that emotions come into play in many things that we do. It's communication that is really built around sharing or finding, seeking insight. It's about having curiosity and letting curiosity drive the ways that we engage. It's also, believe it or not, forward looking. It's not about looking back. It's not about what we have done, but rather what we will do. So this new definition is vital to thinking about communication, not as, you know, that great email or that really fantastic presentation that was both visual and informative. There's a place for those things in the workplace. They're fantastic tools. In fact, Explain makes stuff like that. We make presentations, we make maps, we make visuals, and we think they're really great. But this is the behavioral side, and that's what we want to focus on today. So think of yourselves as nodes in the network, your workplace network. For us, our sense of what really delivers value within a network is this communication, this connective tissue. And in the workplace, when we think about it as nodes, we really have to be thinking about behaviors that help us get through things like sense making, gathering insights, incorporating and adapting information, and facts and data, collaboration. We want to be able to create institutional memory. And this communication that we're thinking about as part of a network of people is really thinking and acting bigger. So if we can take those behaviors, what we're really doing is building connections. That connective tissue with those behaviors, it helps us actually exchange great ideas. It helps us exchange our unique personal experiences and expertise. It helps us to share insight. It helps us to collect and distribute data. It also really helps us share our know-how. So what we're talking about is connection and communication together. It's engaging, it's interactive. At the end of the day, communication is that thing that really helps us do it best. I'm going to pause here. If you haven't been using the chat, start now, because we've got a question for you, and we want to find out more from you. So here's the thing. We want to know, when you think about your workplace today, what's the one word or one idea that really describes that interpersonal, that sort of human communication in your workplace? And it doesn't have to be stellar or glowing or beautiful. It can be, tell us the real. What's communication, human communication like in your workplace? Go to the chat. Think of those 1 or 2 or 3 words you want to say or the phrase. And feel free to take a look at what everybody's saying. Ben, I'm going to let you comment on what you're seeing here in the chat. What do you think?
Well, it's interesting and sadly not surprising that I see a lot of people saying it's broken, it's desperate, it's sparse, because really this is what is kind of the broken paradigm in a lot of our organizations. And so we feel you, and this is why we think this conversation that we're having right now is so critically important, because personal agency is really critical now. It's incumbent on us, and I'm going to talk about these cultural factors in just a minute of why this is so important, but it's incumbent on the individual to be proactive and engage and communicate. And it's hard to do because not all our organizations are set up for that kind of behavior immediately.
Absolutely. And in fact, Ben, I'm curious about one thing. We're seeing a lot of people kind of getting at some of the things that are creating problems maybe for them, or some of the things that they'd like to solve for, which we're going to talk about today. But there's also some really great stuff I'm seeing in the chat. I'm seeing from Chantal that it's caring. I'm seeing from Ross that it's human, but sometimes we get our wires crossed. That's not a bad thing. I mean, to be human to begin with is actually a good starting point. It's very foundational.
It's great.
From Sebastian, I'm seeing that they've got a feedback culture. We're really big on feedback culture, and a productive feedback culture is really amazing. I've got people like Kay saying that they're global. They use a lot of video. Trisha saying that it's direct and open. You know, those of you who are putting in some of these things that we are really pleased to see. We're congratulating you in a way, because we think these are some of the foundational building blocks of great communication at work. Are any of you kind of willing to kind of talk to us a little bit? Chantal, Kay, Trisha, do you want to just raise your hand in the participant window? We'd be really delighted to open your mic and hear from you and kind of help hear more about what your culture of communication is like. Yeah, Chantal, I've opened your mic. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think I'm very lucky that I work in a team where we really care about each other. And our culture is one of allowing vulnerability and allowing to really show up wherever you are and whatever you feel. So it's a very safe space.
Do you work in like a big corporation, or do you a small one? Like, kind of tell us a little bit about your company.
Yeah, we're a small startup that I founded about 5 years ago. And I think, I've managed to, with a lot of tears and a lot of help from my colleagues, we've created a culture of our dream company where we wanted to work.
That's fantastic, Chantal.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. I mean, that's inspiring for all of us. And a lot of the things we're going to talk about for the next 45 minutes or so is really trying to move the needle to get to what you are describing, which is a place of openness and humanity and people willing and feeling safe to kind of share their insights and their feelings about what's going on. That's great.
And what I find really fascinating too is that I'm seeing a little bit of a trend here, not a little bit, it's a big trend for me, is that there are quite a number of startups who've come into the world in the last maybe 5 to 10 years who've done something that we call purpose-driven culture building from the start. And that's really thinking about what kind of company do we want to be? Not just what do we do as a business, but who are we? What's our identity? And how do we define those behaviors? And those companies are really a lot of the model that we've been using for some of this work. So one of our partners at the beginning in this was Phil's Coffee. And we talked quite a bit extensively with them around how they started with culture, how culture was part of the vision of the company and part of the strategy of the company. So that's fantastic to hear. Let me move us on because we've got a lot to share. So Ben, take it away.
Sure. So I'm going to talk for a few minutes about why are we talking about communication in these ways. So I apologize to those of you who are hoping to learn how to write a better email or business letter. This is not that session, but really it's because communication is the future of work. And that's of course a buzzword that everyone uses, but it's really the reality we live in today. And what I like to say is the future of work is the now of work, because we already are operating in many of these ways. And it's really the organizations themselves that are playing catch up, while those of us who are actually doing the work daily kind of already sense and know that this is what's happening on the front lines. Next slide, please. So what do we talk about when we talk about the future of work? Well, automation and artificial intelligence, obviously it's happening everywhere. I've said on previous webinars of these, and I'll say it again, anything that can be automated will be. So if you're doing work, or you know other people who are doing work that's routine, that's monotonous, that could be done by a script, a data analysis, those kinds of things that computer programs could do, that robots could do, those things are coming. We live in an era of information overabundance, right? There was a time when if you held the knowledge, if you held the information, you were really the kingpin of the organization. That's not the world we live in anymore. We live in a world of information at our fingertips, and there's too much of it. So it's that sense-making piece that's really important. And then every leader across organizations across the world right now are being told, you have to let your people free. You have to let them fail. You have to let them be innovative. That's all great. They're not sure how to actualize those in many cases, but the new paradigms of what it means for an organization to be innovative and have new kinds of leadership is out there. So really, that's just all a result of the digital age. And so what we're talking about as communication is how we function as a response to all of these things. Next slide, thank you. So let's take a step back, kind of how did we get here and where are we going then from here? So this is a slide we shared it in one of our previous webinars, but it's worth repeating again. And this is by Klaus Schwab, who is one of the founders of the World Economic Forum. So we kind of moved out, and even when I started in my career back in the late 80s, early 90s, we were still talking about the information age, where if you had the information, that was critically important. Then we sort of moved briefly to the knowledge age, where it was really about I'm a knowledge worker and it's what I know. That's not the world we live in anymore. We live in what's now we're calling here the purpose age, whereas it's not what you know, it's what you can know. It's not what your domain of expertise is today, it's what it will be tomorrow, as the world is in a constant change cycle, and it's what you can adapt to in the future. So what that means is it's really driven by purpose. You have to find meaning in the work that you do and kind of self-fulfillment in the work that you're doing in the job. And if you're constantly searching and learning, you're going to meet that fulfillment. And it's about being self-aware. How do I add things to the organization? And it's about having this sense of purpose. Next slide, please. Another way to think about this then is that kind of old standard of, I came up as an instructional designer and trainer, and a lot of the really good work in training and development was this kind of industrial style. A lot of it came out of the military, actually, of how do you train a bunch of 18-year-old knuckleheads to perform well. And so this kind of emphasis of diligence and having the right intelligence and obeying your command, and that's how an organization gets things done. We all know and recognize now that that's not where things are. So where they're moving towards is this era of connectivity. And what is connectivity if not communication and the skills we bring to those connections that we make? So it's really something that values implicit knowledge, informal learning, the way we create value and have these intangible things that we feel are valuable between us, but it's harder to measure. So that's what we talk about when we talk about the creative economy, the network economy. They're all kind of synonyms for the same movement of our economy and the kinds of jobs that we're going to hold. Next slide, please. So let's think about what are the important things in this new form that communication plays such a central role. And of course, it's about sense making and multi-sourcing. We have so much information coming at us. It feels like noise a lot of the time, right? But it's what sense can we make? What can we separate as noise from signal? What is meaningful in what we're kicking in? And what are all the sources of influence, intelligence, data, know-how that we're able to apply from all these different sources? It's about seeking patterns. Our brains are meant to find patterns and seek out connections. And so this really lends itself to this kind of thinking. I've said before, and it's kind of a catchphrase of mine, I think, by this point. So some of you, if you've heard this before, may roll your eyes, but I really do believe sharing is the new saving. If you come across a great article, or someone had a great idea, or someone said something in a webinar, and you jot it down and you put it in your file cabinet or your digital file cabinet, that's where the idea goes to die. Unless you're sharing, and not just sharing, but sharing why it means something to you, why you thought it was interesting, explain what sparked in you when you had it, and then share it out. That's where you really gain insight and knowledge of what other people's opinions are. So please share instead of save. Put things out into the world. And then lastly, the kind of mode of communication is omnidirectional. If you send this great idea to one person or two people in an email, 95% of the time, that's where it's going to die too, right? We're all overwhelmed in our inbox. We all have too much communication coming in one form or another to really make sense of it. You need to expand your horizon. If you have an idea, communicate it out in every direction, through different channels, through different avenues, in meetings, on social media, through blogs, if you do that to make sense, through your emails. Yes, that's one other way. But it's really about connecting and sharing ideas with as many people as possible in this omnidirectional way instead of a two-way communication. And this is, again, back to this diagram that we saw earlier, but this is where it really starts to pull together, and I hope makes some sense to you why we're talking about it this way. Because value is created in the network. The insights are not in the nodes of the network, which is here the orange people or the yellow people, I guess. That's if I have a great idea, a great sense of expertise, or some great insight, that's not that useful. What's useful is when I put that out to other people and the value is created in the spaces between us, in the conversations we have, in ideas bouncing and colliding against each other. This makes sense to me. I challenge that assumption. These two ideas combined together is creating something greater. The value is created in the spaces, in the conversations between us. That's where the magic of our communication world, of our network world, really sinks in. And the good news is this really favors those who might have had their voices squelched in the past, or might have been reluctant to share in the past. Maybe you're an introvert. Maybe you're reluctant for whatever reasons, and we can think of a lot if we polled people. Maybe you're reluctant in a meeting to address authority and say, I have an idea how to solve this problem. Or I had this insight, I'm not sure how useful it'll be, but it makes sense to me to do X. So if you've been in a position where you feel like your voice has not been heard, or you haven't been empowered to connect, all these different omnidirectional methods of communication that we do with our work, opens up a world of possibility for your voice, your insights to be heard, right? Whenever we're in meetings, I never assume that the quiet person at the meeting is quiet because he or she doesn't have good ideas, right? I always make a note. I want to seek that person out and find out what they're not sharing and why, right? Because usually that's where really good ideas can come from. So all of the kind of movements we talk about in the modern future of work, we talk about design thinking and servant leadership and network culture and self-management. All these ideas are really akin to each other in the sense that they float around this idea that it's about the way people collaborate and cooperate together within their networks, across their industries, across geographic areas. That communication is really the key and centerpiece to it all. And it's so critically important that we learn kind of the methods and modes to get this right.
You know, Ben, I always look at this list on the left as sort of the new hot ideas of, well, we want to start changing our behavior at work. You know, we hear this a lot. Can you come help us, use design thinking as a methodology at work? Can we do it all in our business? Can we be more agile? Oh, can you help us create more of a network culture? Can you help us with a self-management culture? And yes, absolutely. And one of the first things we always do is we start looking at the nature of engagement or interaction with people, right? So if we're going to redesign our ways of working, our methods at work, if we're going to sort of revitalize and evolve our culture, one of the first places we do that is right here with this type of interpersonal communication. It's this engagement, these behaviors we're talking about today that are vital. I mean, I don't think you can do anything on the left without really looking at at communication as a behavior first. They all depend on great interplay between people.
Absolutely right. It's why we do these webinars. You know, this is not an opportunity for us to show our expertise. I mean, we hope you enjoy it and get something out of it. But we absolutely, when we open up the chat lines and want to hear your voices, that is a big part of it for us. We're in a constant state of learning and communicating too. And it's critically important to what we do in our practice to hear from you. And so we welcome these conversations.
Great. Great. So let's keep going, because I know that a lot of people want to get to, so how do we make this real at work? So
absolutely. We're getting there.
Yes.
We're getting there. So really, let's think about, unless you're able to function in these new, I wouldn't call them creative, communicative, that's a mouthful, way, unless you're able to kind of learn these modes, which we're going to go through in a moment, it's going to be very hard for you to adapt and function at a high level. Because what communication is moving is from this directive, authoritative, I want to communicate with you because I want to tell you how it's going to be or what my opinion is, rather to an inquisitive, I want to communicate with you because I'm open to learning and I want to engage in a conversation, right? Rather than sharing what we did, I've been working on this project for the last 3 months and I have the perfect presentation now to explain it all. No, I want to communicate every day, every step along the way, so that what I'm working on becomes a collaborative and cooperative effort that we can all have some ownership over, right? From the task, oh, I need to spend 45 minutes answering emails today, that's a task in my day, to no, actually the communication and conversation is the mode of the work that I do on a daily basis. It's a constant form of communication. And rather than I want to communicate because I want to be understood, no, I want to communicate to understand what's going on in my department, in my organization, in my industry, in the world, the economy, all those things. I communicate to understand what's going on around me, not to tell you what I already understand, because I know what I know already, but my value is in learning what else is going on. Thanks, next slide. So to summarize, so like how do we kind of pull these things together before we get to specific behaviors? So we communicate in the work is really about creating value, right? It's how we do it. The studious, diligent, head down worker at their desk, pecking away for days, might be doing something brilliant, but that's not really useful to the people around him unless he or she is communicating and creating value. This is what I'm working on. Here's why. Who has ideas that can inform that? It's making sense of all the information that's coming in, and by asking questions and really, kind of asking how we might form things together, how we can test ideas and envision different paradigms for how we work together. It's about starting with the purpose and the intent that I want to move forward. I want to learn. My work is important to me. My organizational goals that my organization has are important to me. And I'm constantly seeking to learn from others rather than have others necessarily learn from me.
So before we go any further, I know that what we're talking about now is sort of making the transition from the premise of our idea around communication being the connective tissue, the thing that makes all great behavior at work. And one of the things I want you to sort of shift into your mindset now as we talk about how to make this real at work is that a lot of what we're about to present to you is about really very personal decisions and individual choices in how you will go out and act and behave. This is action oriented, but a lot of it really is about first being very meditative or thoughtful about kind of internalizing these ideas. So what we're going to present to you is not, start setting up meetings. We're not going to be very tactical in that sense. We're going to be much more strategic and also very personal, giving you some methods and things that you can do on a personal level to start to shift your mindset and shift your behaviors. So I want to begin with the idea that mindsets matter because it's the intent often or the thing you're trying to achieve that should shape your behaviors. So we always begin with communication mindsets with self-awareness. This is a little bit of the idea of being able to first begin with looking at yourself and understanding your own motivations. The drivers that are putting you in a position where you might react or interact in non-productive ways. So you have to put your own motivations in check. The other thing to understand is that if you can do that, if you can build your own self-awareness about what you want or what's driving your behavior, you can begin to build authentic connections with people. Because if you understand what's driving you if I'm trying to engage with Ben and work on a project with him, if I really understand that what I want out of the project is my own criteria of being successful and wanting to present great ideas for something like this today, I have to approach Ben with the same sort of authenticity of saying, look, I really want to do a great job. And yet I'm also feeling nervous or scared about certain things that don't feel quite ready. I have to be honest with myself and I have to use that to then guide my actions. And that's how Ben and I will connect more productively. I think if you can get self-awareness right, the rest of these get a little bit easier. So think about this next one this way. In combination, being inquisitive, meaning really having a desire to be curious, to want to know, to want to learn, is best done first with a sense of humility. It means beginning with the idea that you don't know everything and that you have very many things to uncover or understand. And that's why you're engaging with people. That's why you're going out to communicate and work together. And that really can lead with you in terms of actions to take is leading with inquiry. Now, this is really important because there's some really great frameworks from the 90s and the early 2000s around balancing inquiry and advocacy. And what we would caution you around is that advocacy can often feel like the right way to get things done, the speedy way to get things done, because you have to, have a position. You have to defend your ideas or your opinions. But what we're seeing now is a really big need to start to lead with inquiry, and not the kind of inquiry that is inquisition. You're not questioning people because you think you know. You're asking to find out more, to learn, because you realize that you don't know. You believe that you have more to learn. And that's a really important mindset set that you've got to shift into before you go into the modality of inquiry with others. So very important idea to keep in mind. I think the next one also is a good combination. Being transparent, being credible, and being empathetic together can really lead to creating alignment and commitment. And I'll break this up for you just a little bit. People really do want transparency. They want to know why you're doing things. They want to know to what end. They want to know how to be involved. They want to know how this impacts them. But they also want to be able to share ideas. They want to be able to problem solve with you throughout that process. And to do that, you have to be credible. You have to have good data. You have to not just, there's a lot to be said about having a gut about things, a very human kind of instinct about things, but you have to balance that with good information and good data. You have to be willing to have, past performance or even current performance of something help make decisions. You can't just go on gut alone. And I think the other thing that's important here is that you've really got to be empathetic. You have to understand how other people have come to their conclusions and how they might be interpreting data. If you can actually shift your brain into thinking this way, then you're much more likely to go out and work towards creating alignment and commitment. People are more willing to exchange with that sort of credibility and transparency and empathy, and you will have that sort of lasting commitment to the things you work on. Number 4 is a combination of things like being inclusive and then also being open to feedback and failure. So there's a shift we're hoping to make in our minds and work right now. Inclusive really just means inviting a lot of different perspectives. And when you're doing that, it's being also open to inviting in feedback, suggestions, changes that could make things better. You have to constantly trying to multi-source those new ideas, those new ways of working. And they're going to sound like feedback. They're going to sound like critique. And you have to be open to that. And in the same vein, you have to be able to let things fail. Because in the failing is how you learn to do things better. That's where the feedback becomes the most valuable. When you're failing and asking for feedback, you can course correct. You can collaborate more effectively. And when you're working like this, inclusively and openly, you're really building lasting network partners. And that's really the goal, is to go out and build partnerships with other people to work together to get things done. And we would say informal partnerships. This doesn't have to be a project or initiative. This is really going out and multi-sourcing more and more people to build your network. And it really is the strength of what you can do at work, is to have more and more people who understand you and you understand them and each other's mutual needs to create value for each other. Number 5 is participation and advocacy. So I kind of did a little ding on advocacy, saying advocacy can be a little overpowering. And that's true. I think a lot of us are much more comfortable with advocacy. But we're also sometimes not very good at putting that advocacy in check. So the way I would like to sort of help frame up now the notion here is that participation means that you acknowledge that other people are going to be advocating as well. They're going to have a point of view. So you've got to create a space for participation. You can advocate. Obviously, to get things done, you've got to have a point of view. But if you're doing numbers 2, 3, and 4, by the time you're ready to advocate, it's well thought out. It's actually very meaningful, and it's driven probably by data that you can all mutually agree is valuable data. And in that sense, you will drive speed and progress. These are the big things that business really wants. But my caution here is that if you leave out 1, 2, 3, and 4, you're probably just going to get a lot of bull in a china shop kind of experience where everybody's just plowing through and it's not very thoughtful progress. And the last one is a little bit of a capstone. So if we begin with self-awareness, we end with open, accepting, flexible mind, having a mindset of being open, accepting, and flexible. If you're in this mindset all the time, what you're essentially doing is creating safety and trust. And that makes everything easier. It makes being inquisitive easier. It makes accepting other people's data easier. It makes failure easier. So what you're really trying to do is create a lot of safety in the network you build, or a lot of safety in the alignment you create. And that trust will get people to do it with you over and over again.
So getting to add to that, Holly, so getting to failure quickly obviously is important. You've all heard, if you're not failing, you're not trying. That's nothing new here. But what we want to highlight about that is, if you're not failing publicly, if you're not sharing your failures and inviting people to give you feedback or insight, you're not willing to learn. So it's not just failing, it's failing publicly and inviting everything you can learn from all different perspectives to really drive that. And that is, something we do when we communicate and share openly.
Great. So Ben and I are tired of talking. We want to hear from you. So if you reflect on these mindsets and behaviors, we really want to know, based on your experience today, which of these 6 mindsets and behavior combination do you think your workplace would benefit from having more of, or having it, maybe it's missing today, but take a look at them. We're going to put a poll up on the screen, and we'd love to hear from the group. Is there one of these that, wow, if we could just get this, more of this, or get this right, maybe my workplace would actually be a much more effective and productive workplace?
It's going to be hard to choose just one.
Yeah, it is. It's difficult, because I think that I like them as a set as well. But there's also starting points. You can't do everything.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm very curious how people will answer this.
Yeah, we've got about a third of folks have voted, so we'll keep the poll open a little bit longer. And I'm going to check the chat real quick. Um, Absolutely. That's Paula, right? Paula, I'm happy you're using the chat. Trust is a fundamental issue for a lot of groups. And a lot of times I hear from people that it isn't that they don't want to trust each other. It's just that things are constantly moving and changing, that you can't really trust that things are going to be consistent or things are going to be sort of long-standing. People can't even trust, that things aren't going to be sort of changed suddenly underneath them.
And I'm curious what Sarah, I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing that correctly. I feel like I would choose a different one for within my team and for across teams. If you want to follow up with another comment explaining that, like what the difference is and what those would be, I'd love to hear it.
And Sarah, actually, our next question was going to be, did we miss one? So if you already voted and you want to go into the chat and tell us what we missed, tell us what we missed. We're going to open the lines here in chat in just a bit because we want to hear from you and kind of understand what's going on in your workplace as well. So we've got about 49 people have voted. We've got about 64% of the folks have voted. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll so we can take a quick look at that and move on to really hearing from you in person. So right now, I'm going to share the results of this poll. It looks like transparency, credibility, and empathy and driving alignment and commitment seems to be the biggest need right now, although I can see that there's a lot of people weighing in on inclusion and as well as the other three at the bottom, participation.
And it's interesting, Holly, because our last webinar in this series was really about transparency and credibility and alignment and commitment and how do you form kind of belonging and get kind of public commitments to what's going on. So that's a really interesting one. So if you haven't heard that webinar, I invite you to go back and have a listen.
Absolutely. And here's what I'd like to do. I want to use the window where you can raise your hand. I believe it's in the participants window. Raise your hand if you actually identified transparent, credibility, empathy, and alignment. And I'd like to open your microphone and have you kind of tell us why you picked that. So if you're raising your hand, Amy, I'm going to open your mic. Tell us why you picked that.
Can you hear me okay?
Perfect.
Okay, great. We're going through a big change initiative in my organization, and there are a lot of people in senior management who completely understand the change in our strategy and how it aligns, and it's just not communicated down. So I'm in a position where I can see what senior management is looking at and what they're giving to the board. And we've done all these wonderful things in the community and the employees haven't been told about it or had a chance to celebrate it. And it's like, if we could just get those things out there some way, it would be, we would understand the why for the change management or for the change, and the why is the most important part.
It is. Yeah, a lot of the time we encounter this a lot where there's a pretty good sized change going on, and the hardest thing for a lot of leaders to do is to think beyond the strategic actions of change, because they're very much focused on what we're doing strategically, and it often gets left to the side of how we're going to actually take the big ideas, take this thing that could be very powerful and positive for the business and translate it into something very meaningful for people. And
yes.
And it's a difficult challenge because we don't, as businesses today, really allocate time and resources towards creating that meaning for people. Mm-hmm. And just a quick little case study, we've done a lot of work like that at Explain, where we're really trying to take the idea of what the opportunity in a change is and help leaders plan for the ways that they would engage. And almost every one of those plans, the type of engagement is very personal. It's giving people some sort of like a talking guide, like a discussion guide, and then a map or a framework where they can sit down with their team and say, so if this is what the big change is at a strategic level, what does that mean to us and our team? How can we sit down together as a team and talk about what would change or be different for us and how we're going to work differently, or what our new goals might be in order to do that? And so a lot of the things we do is really very tactical tools to make that change real and meaningful for people. And if you're interested, Amy, I think I'll put my email in the chat. Feel free to email me and we can talk a little bit about some of the frameworks we could share with you.
Yeah, we've seen quite a few cases where there's a change initiative and, from top down, it's communicated, oh, we put the communications out in every email we send and in 5 different channels and da 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 da. But it's really about the acceptance and openness of the people you're trying to have the change effect on. In other words, it's until people believe it and internalize it, that change is going to be very difficult. You know, to get those first few wildebeest to cross the river and to show that it's okay, it's very hard. And so it's really about opening up opportunities for people to, in very small ways, have these I'm going to try it and see what happens kind of experiences where they can feel like, oh, okay, this really is a change that's going to affect me and how I'm able to function.
Absolutely. Ben, I'm going to just jump over to the chat window now because I want to look at some of the things that people are putting in there. We ask you, did we miss something? There's some behaviors in here that are more important that maybe we didn't include. I just want to say, Sarah said that being curious and leading with inquiry from across your teams and being open, accepting, something very important to her team. Denise says that manager meetings in a box are very effective, providing talking points and FAQs to leaders, have meaningful conversations with their teams and one-on-ones. Denise, we absolutely agree. It's a lot, sounds pretty much like some of the tools that we create. Absolutely. Does anybody else want to raise their hand and comment on why they chose their particular mindset and behavior combo in the poll, or maybe even what they think is missing or what they could do more of at work? We're happy to open up your line and chat a bit more. Is it Paula? Paula,
Yes,
you're, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Excellent. So our challenge is largely with trust. I work for a very large organization. We have over 100,000 employees. I'm up in Canada, and it's a public sector group. And we have just taken on, in the last couple of years, a massive, massive system implementation, which is driving massive cultural change. And within our key project team, we've brought together a number of people who, at the individual level, are the personification of the other 5. Actually, individually, they are all the personifications of these approaches. They're self-aware, they're inquisitive, they're empathetic, everybody's open to feedback. We all really do believe that we need to be failing because we're not trying. We all want to get engaged, we want to participate. And yet, given scope and scale and speed of implementation, we're all finding that there is a massive breakdown in that feeling of safety and trust. And rebuilding that has been an ongoing challenge. I work in the communications side of things, okay, but it's a broad spectrum component, both when we're reaching out to our stakeholders on the change management piece, but also internal to the team. And it's been a real challenge to try and structure and think about how we can do that when those behaviors are there individually, and yet organizationally it seems to be breaking down.
So my gut on this, Paula, is that so what you're describing is what I call changing the wheels on the bus while it's rolling down the road. And people talk about change that way all the time, but my analogy is a little different, which is when we're going through change, we'll change process. That's one wheel of the bus. We'll change the technology or the systems. That's another wheel of the bus. We might even change things like strategy or capabilities or people, right? That's another wheel on the bus. The fourth wheel that often doesn't get changed and remains kind of like a tiny spare tire while all the wheels are a lot bigger. All the other 3 wheels are bigger, and that little spare tire doesn't get changed. That is the culture and the behavior that we need to transition to. And it becomes sort of this thing that, like you're saying, we have a lot of the great qualities and mindsets and behaviors sort of distributed across people, but not really centralized in something that we can create very tangible or discrete behaviors around. And the first step for me is always is really acknowledging that we also need to change that culture wheel, the one on the bus that we're not paying attention to. And a lot of the methods we use to do that begin with actually opening the conversation around, hey, there's all this other change going on. We're changing these other 3 wheels. At the same time, we have to incorporate into those conversations, how do we need to act or behave differently? How do we need to start, and really using the language that you see on this slide, saying things like, okay, so if we're really lacking trust right now, could it be that we're not really all of us okay with feedback, that we're not all behaving the same way as it pertains to feedback and failure? do we need to think about more of a common way? I don't want to say standard, but common ways, like what is acceptable? What is not acceptable? And just starting with that conversation among leaders, managers, and teams is starting to change that little spare tire on the bus. And it will get, and I think that there's also some frameworking we could do. I really do agree with Denise that those talking points in a box, the manager and the meeting boxes, when you can build that conversation around those behaviors and mindsets into those talking points, into those conversations for teams, it's a great starting point. Obviously, later down the road, you're going to want to look at how you start to change really big systematic features of the culture. Things like hiring profiles and job descriptions, things like metrics and measures for performance management. And building those ideas into that will become vital to making people realize that what we measure is really what we want, or what we hire for is what we're looking for in terms of culture, not just in terms of skill sets and capabilities. It kind of has to be, again, a little bit omnidirectional in what the different departments of the company start to think about as well. Ben, did you want to add anything?
I think that's very well stated. I mean, it is hard stuff. I mean, culture change is hard, as every organization that's tried it, and most should be trying it at this point if they're not already. It's very difficult. And, you know, trust is one of those things that it's 1,000 little acts. It's never one big communication. It's showing it that you are true to what you say is going to happen. It happens day to day, hour to hour, week to week. And so it takes a concerted effort by a lot of kind of champions out there to really say, this is our new paradigm and this new behavior is invited and expected.
Did that help, Paula?
It really did. Thank you so much.
Yeah, okay, great. And again, anytime you want to email me, we can talk some frameworks, some things that we've used, maybe even before we customize them, we can give you some stuff to look at if you're interested.
Thanks so much. That's appreciated.
One more person raised their hand. It was Chantal. We want to keep on moving, Chantal. So I'm going to open up your mic and then we'll get right on to Ben's slides coming up next. Go ahead, Chantal. You still there, Chantal?
Hi, Holly.
Yes.
Yeah, I think these qualities are just amazing. I think just.
Oh, did we lose her?
I think we lost. Oh no, hold on. Chantal, could you start over? I think we had a little blip here on this.
No problem. I think like beautiful values on walls, you know, these qualities might be there, but I think sometimes we don't prioritize communication enough. And we make just broad assumptions around people should know things. So I think those habits around having really effective communication at all levels of the organization is essential.
You know, you said something I say a lot, which is you can put these things on the wall, but if it's not a habit, I love the word habit. If it's not a habit, then it's just something on the wall. So you really do have to be creating actions, behaviors that are habits. You habitually ask for feedback. You sort of habitually think about being transparent, and then, you know, really going out and saying, before we move ahead, I want your commitment. I want to be aligned with you. I want to make sure that we're not just railroading this down the road. So I do think it's habitual is what we've got to get to. Okay, Ben, we're going to move you on. We already did the poll. We already did the chat. So start now. Go, Ben.
Start now. So let's talk about the things you can do on a very simple level, day to day, that will actually can and will make a difference if it becomes, as Holly said, this kind of habit. So the first thing is go out there and find and connect with other people. Like, your department is not enough. So maybe you already have a big network, but most people generally don't within the workplace. So make a concerted effort. Find someone who does a similar job to you in a different department, or find someone in a different department that does something with the similar data that you work with, but in a different way. Or reach out across your industry and find people who do your job across industries. Make a concerted effort to build your network with diversity of gender, race, geographic dispersion, all the things we talk about in diversity. But it's really essentially, for us and our purposes, it's a diversity of ideas. Ask, seek, sense make, share, right? Be curious. Don't communicate with an agenda of your own. I want to show what an expert I am. Communicate with, hey, I'm working on this problem and I need help. It's just really important. Own your failures. We've already talked about failure. So really say, hey, I tried this thing, total disaster. I want to try it again, make it much better next time. Who's done this before? Who has an idea of how this might better? Who works in another project who has had a similar type of failure and rebuild? Who has been successful in doing something similar, and what can I learn from them? Share credit and applaud others. There's nothing greater than reaching out and say, hey, Holly, you did such a great job today. There's such power in that, in acknowledging others, giving credit away, and accepting with humility when someone wants to praise you and give you credit. So really, that can go a long way to building trust when you just point out, hey, you know what, Jim, you made a really interesting comment at today's meeting, and I noted it. That alone can go a long way to kind of building the communication and the faith in the kind of culture that you're trying to build. And then be courageous, right? Life is in the arena. Not to go all Brene Brown on us, but you really have to put yourself out there and be bold, be courageous, you know, and share your ideas. If you have an idea, if you see a problem happening, if you have an insight, if you saw an article that you think is relevant, bring it in and say, hey, folks, here's something I read. This is why it's important to me, and put it out there. Communicate it in this omnidirectional way that we've talked about. When you act in those ways, what I call cooperative ways, with no direct expectation for what you may receive back, but just with the expectation that if I find it interesting, someone else might, and hopefully someone else is sharing something that they find interesting and sharing what their insights are about it. When you start adding value into those networks and nodes that we talked about, everybody wins. And you'll find great satisfaction in doing that. It's worked for me, and I know it's worked for other people as well. So going on, so accept critique, right? Going with applauding others is also everyone needs to learn, everyone needs to improve. We should be on a path of constant improvement. That should be our mindset. So accept critique with humility, be available. Bring your authentic self to work. I know a lot of us go to work and we put on our work clothes and we kind of gird up for the day and we go in there and we behave in a certain way. And as soon as we leave, now, of course, you're not going to come into work in your sweatpants, but you want to make kind of your real self, your real interest available and present, showing up. As you know, all the self-help books will say, showing up is half the battle, but showing up authentically and being present really is a lot to this, and not putting on a face of apathy or putting on a face of a critical face or a cynical face, but being available and being present to what's going on and how you can add to it. Tell the truth. Do not lie, right? We all fall into habits of telling little lies along the way. Little lies become big lies after a while. It's really not a good habit. So be tactful, but be truthful. Emphasize where the win-wins are. Find, you know, in this big network that you're building, find little and big ways that you can say, we can help each other on this, or your idea meshes with my idea I had about this. What do you think? And we can create something new, right? The value is created, again, in those conversations between us. So really go out there and empathize with other people, find out what makes them tick, and really bring your authentic self to them, learn and share, and that's empathy. And then add value where you can, which is really kind of the summation of all those things.
And I like to think of it as, what I love about adding value when you put it this way, Ben, because you're the one who taught it to me, is that it's where you can and learn when you can't. But you also have said to me, learn why, because sometimes the why is just as important as you know, when it's not possible. So that's also some really good building.
Yeah. I've certainly sat in conversations where I was like, I don't have anything to add here, but that becomes the best learning opportunities at times.
Yeah, and I agree, Paula. When it's the opposite too. Like if you can't add value, then you could be making it harder for others to find the value they're looking for. So like that, when you are there, when you're not there, is a conscious decision that you make in order to be really helpful. I'm actually going to move on to something real quick. I want to share with you that a number of people had given us some questions prior to coming into this webinar, and I think that we may have addressed a lot of those. And I'm going to open the floor to Ben to kind of address questions in a second. But I want to share with you that all the work that we've done in these webinars to date will be part of 2 different things that we're doing in the Culture Summit in San Francisco in June. We'll be doing a workshop on June 25th. It'll actually occur twice on that day. It'll be on organizational adulting. And what we're planning to do for this is we're planning to take all the work we've done in these 3 webinars and create a workshop where you create your own frameworks to take back to work for org adulting. Things like those manager meetings in a box, those tools that you can take back to work and share with others to create a much more productive workplace. So we'll be doing that on the 25th of June. And then on the 27th of June, we'll be doing an interactive piece where we're actually going to take those frameworks to the main stage and test them out with the big group. So if you're at all close to San Francisco in June and you want to join us, you can go sign up for the Culture Summit at www.culturesummit.co and join us. We'd love to see you there. Ben, I'm going to go back to questions and let you kind of take it from there.
Sure, that would be great. It'd be great to see some of you in San Francisco too. I mean, we really are going to try and fail very publicly there as a learning experience. So we invite you to be a part of that. So please, if you have questions, type them in and I'll try to address them as we have a few minutes left. Or if you really want to raise your hand, I think Erica can probably open your mic and we can let you ask a question out loud as well. Thank you to those of you who are saying that you appreciate our ideas that we're sharing. That's great. Don't go all shy on us now.
All right, you raised your hand and all we've got is your phone number. So your mic is open if you raised your hand.
Okay. We'll get that sorted out. In the meantime, Kay asks, what strategies would work when dealing with colleagues you only communicate via video? You know, in this digital world, there's face-to-face communication is unlike any other. There's still a very human element to it. But remote communication, just as we're doing right now, can also be useful. What I find is useful is if you have video conferencing or over Skype or over whatever platform you use and you have a meeting that some of you are on camera and it's all remote, there's the actual meeting, and I recommend you record them so you can go back and say, what did that person say? But we have found great use in then creating, during a meeting, if there's more than a few people, a back channel where people can reflect, ask questions that then come up later in that conversation or become a living, breathing, ongoing thread that carries from the live meeting session into something where people can reflect and share and add to and put resources or things that they've seen to it, so that when you're dealing with remote workforce or geographic dispersity, you develop several channels in which to carry on those conversations. And sometimes you'll hone in on one that you find works best for you. But I think it's a matter of being very concerted about, we are remote, and so we have to develop ways that work for us to communicate in various different ways.
You know, I think of it also this way, Ben, it's a little divergent from what you're talking about, but I think it's really important when you, and I'm a remote worker, by the way. I live in New York and most of my team lives in Portland, Oregon. I find it very helpful to video chat with people one-on-one, even if it's just for half an hour, a couple of times a month. And the purpose of the call is a connection call. It really is to think about what's working and what's not working. It's taking a lot of the principles that we put up on the slides up here, you know, like finding ways to connect, you know, really kind of finding ways to be in, you know, common things that we can discuss, thinking through any kind of challenges or opportunities that we have. I love a lot of these ideas here, Ben, because what I've been doing in my one-on-ones with people a few times a month is really trying to use these behaviors in order to connect better with others. So it's again, it's the mindset and the awareness of wanting to do this. It's wanting to connect with people and creating that safe space. We're at our time right now. My email is in the chat. If you want to, you can also connect with Explain through our newsletter. We'd be happy to have you sign up and hear more from us more frequently about more webinars and opportunities for us to interact with you. We get a lot out of hearing from you and your experiences as well. So please sign up for our newsletter or come see us at the Culture Summit. We'd love to work with you in person there too. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate your participation, and hopefully we learn together.